Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Dr. Bradley Campbell podcast. And we today have Dr. Joel Warsh, a super great treat for all of you to listen or watch. And I just had a great time interviewing him. I just got off from this call, and what a physician who truly cares. I am impressed by how much Joel really cares, and he simplifies things down for you. And remember, the most important thing is not what to think, but how to think, and having health perspective from practitioners who are in the trenches, who are really helping people out there. It's just so important. So many people are just like, take this product, do this, do that. They're telling you what to do. Dr. Joel, as you will hear, wants to teach you his perspective on the pros and the cons of different things. He wrote this amazing book recently, Parenting at Your Child's Pace. And I think that's what it's all about. It's about teaching you how to be a better parent and how to think through some of the questions and health things that children will have. Super excited for you to get to know Dr. Joel Warsh. I hope you follow him, Dr. Joel Gator, on Instagram. We'll post some of his information and things to follow in the show notes and highlights. He grew up in Toronto, Canada, got a master's degree in epidemiology, which is sort of like a public health degree, before getting his medical degree. And he's completed his pediatric medicine training at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, and then worked in private practice in Beverly Hills before founding his current practice in Studio City. He's published research in peer-reviewed journals on topics including childhood injuries, obesity, and physical activity. He's been on tons of documentaries, films, summits, podcasts, articles. He's got his own supplement line, the Tiny Roots Apothecary, and much more. Please enjoy Dr. Joel Warsh. Thank you, Dr. Joel, for coming on to the Dr. Bradley Campbell podcast. We're talking all things pediatrics today, and really excited to introduce you in a deeper level to more of my audience. I know I've mentioned you many times on Instagram, but some people follow you, some people don't. When you share something and you hope that people go read the book or do the thing, and people are busy. So a lot of times, I find that I can get more people through the podcast to learn about you, be inspired to follow you, to get your book, to listen to more of the amazing wisdom that you have as a pediatrician with many years in practice. And excited to have you on. So thanks for joining.
Well, thanks for having me on, and thanks for everything that you do. I'm really honored to be a part of this, and love everything that you share. And you're one of the most reshared people on my Instagram for sure.
Oh, nice. Very cool. I mean, I try to be a voice of love, calm, and humor when the world's so crazy right now. And I think people are needing less fear, less anxiety, which is something I appreciate about your book. It's kind of helping to take people's stress level and just decompress it a little bit. But love for you to introduce who you are, what you do, what you're all about, where you're from, for the listeners.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. I mean, first of all, I think that the world is way too divisive. It's too insane. I mean, if for somebody like you to be censored online or things like that, it's just nutty, just sharing our opinions. And for me as a physician, I'm a pediatrician, and I feel like I can't necessarily say all the things that I want to say. I definitely try to push the boundaries a little bit, or just speak as much as I can, but there are a lot of topics you just can't talk about. People know what they are. But for me, I did all the regular training in medicine. I got very frustrated with the regular system, the super short visits, medications for everything, focusing on treatment all the time. And so that's what led me to start learning about natural medicine and integrative medicine. I'm not, overly woo-woo. I grew up in normal family in Toronto, Canada, and I, ate at fast food sometimes, and I did all the things that I now know better. But I had a pretty normal life, and just realized that there is a lot that we are never taught in medicine, and seeing people get better, going to natural practitioners and thinking like, well, what is that? Like, why does somebody have an autoimmune condition? They're on medication for life, and then go to some other, woo-woo practitioner based on what you're taught. It's like they go to naturopath or a chiropractor or something, and then they get better. And that started me really thinking like, okay, well, maybe there's something more to this. I need to start learning about it. And I did. And it's really very obvious that the things that are taught in natural medicine and functional medicine make a lot of sense and are very common sense and obvious. And thinking about root cause, of course, we should be doing that, but we don't really get taught that in medicine. So I started combining the best of both worlds. I do that in my office. I'm in Los Angeles, so I think I got very lucky in terms of the location and getting to take care of some very prominent people pretty early on in my career, just based on location and maybe just there are a lot more people than I realized that are really interested in this. And that led me to start doing more online because there's only so much you can do in the office. And then that led me to write the book, Parenting at Your Child's Pace, because I wanted to get that information out there for the parents and the first readers. Just like you said, parents are so stressed. And I think we're more stressed than ever, even though we have more access to information than ever. And in many ways, life is less stressful as a parent than it ever was. I mean, there's certainly things that are stressful, but I wanted to kind of show that balance, but also talk about health. Parenting books are written mostly these days by therapists, by moms, and they're great perspectives, but the books from the past are written by pediatricians, most of them. And I think we need a book that is balanced, goes through those questions that parents have, like potty training and tantrums and all that stuff, but also talks about health. The therapist books that are great, they don't talk about health, but yet we have chronic disease rates of around 50% in kids. And if we don't get ahead of these things, then things are just going to continue to get worse. And so that's why I start the book in the first chapter, and I don't know what direction you want to go in terms of talking about things, but the first chapter is about health. And then it gets into the parenting questions, because I think that everything goes together, and most of the major books out there miss that piece.
For sure. Well, I want to go back real quick just to your story about I know you did a master's degree in epidemiology, right?
Correct.
I was curious too, before jumping in the book, of like, how has that shaped the way you see patients?
I think I'm not sure if it changes the way I see patients, but I think it changed the way that I see research and just having a much better understanding, because, for those that don't know that word, which I didn't know that word before, it's basically public health. It's research, research of medicine. And so I did some multiple different research studies, obesity, physical activity research at that time. And it really, the biggest thing that I took away, crazily enough, from doing a master's was that data is easily shapeable. You can very easily change one or two parameters and get very different results with the same data. And so it really led me to understand what can be done in the research, especially by really smart people in pharmaceutical companies or otherwise, where they can shape the results that we're going to see based on knowing what's most likely to give them the results that they're looking for. And so when you take these complex models and you get a statistically significant result, I mean, that's still important. I mean, this is the data that we have, but most people don't realize how much you can affect that by just changing one variable to get the result that you're looking for, to show something that isn't necessarily true.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a complicated thing in private practice too, is like, how do you figure out like how to listen to your patients and like believe what they're telling you, but also use some of the evidence that's out there in research to kind of guide you as well.
Yeah. But can I talk that? Because I think that's a really
Yeah.
important point. One of the things that is most frustrating to me in medicine is the direction that it seems to be going in terms of telling people what to do instead of partnering or discussing things. Medicine, I mean, the name doctor comes from docere, which is teach, right? And that's what medicine always was. It was teaching, it was discussing, it was partnering, it was being a part of the family. The doctor would have their little, side kit, and they'd go to the house and they'd have a discussion. And to me, it's not telling people what to do, except in an emergency situation where it's like, okay, this is really bad. You need to go to the hospital. Your kid is very sick. Other than that, I think our job is to provide parents with all the information that we can to help them make the best decision possible, to provide them with the best data that we know from the research, to provide them with what's reasonable within the bounds of safe that you feel, and then let them choose. And for the most part, I think if you have a good relationship, then they're probably going to trust your opinion, and they're probably going to go with what you say, and that's what it should be. But you also shouldn't impose your beliefs upon your patient. You give them that kind of information and say, well, you could do this or you could do this, and then let them choose. And I think especially when it comes to parenting, there are so many situations where the data isn't anywhere near definitive. And so there are a lot of options of things that you can do. And then a good example of that would be feeding a baby, right? Let's say a 6-month-old, we're going to start feeding babies. And how do we do it? Do we do baby-led weaning, which is giving them, little chunks of food, or do we mush up the food? And there's this whole movement of, you got to do baby-led weaning, and that's so much better for them. And there is some evidence that it could be better in some ways, but it also stresses parents out so much. And sometimes people want to do it because they saw it on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, that it's the thing to do.
Right.
And if you don't do it, then your kid's going to have eating problems and they're going to have obesity and they're going to, this and that. And they start getting stressed about it. But the reality is it doesn't really matter, right? You could give them either one. And like what you should be worried about is them having food. There are kids in the world that don't have food. So like which one really matters, baby led weaning or puree? And I always tell parents like, well, you could do this or that. There's some evidence on both. Do both. Give them avocado first if you want to. That's kind of both. Mush up some things, give them food. If you're super stressed, don't do that. Don't give them, chunks of food right away if that worries you.
Right.
And so that's where to me it's like there's this evidence, but also the reality of the world.
For sure. Yeah, I love that point. And later we can talk about the placental encapsulations too. But it's one of those things like the baby-led weaning seems to be, I didn't realize because I don't have too many child patients, but like I don't have kids myself yet, hopefully in the next couple of years, but I didn't realize how much a hot topic baby-led weaning is, or even like sleep training and co-sleeping and all those things I love to talk about. But it is interesting to look at what evidence there is and then what works and then like what are you and other pediatricians seeing work over decades, because I almost tend to go more towards like trusting a person rather than the American Academy of Pediatrics. Like I use that information, I use the CDC, I use the FDA for information, but then I sort of say like I ask my clinician friends, I'm like, hey, what do you see? Does this make sense to you? Does this make sense from what you're seeing clinically? And use that sort of like I sort of view you and other people I know as almost the gold standard, people who are able to synthesize their real world experience with the data back and forth.
Right.
But yeah, as far as the baby-led weaning, how old are babies when they're doing that process?
Usually around 6 months. So usually babies are starting eating around 6 months, maybe 5, 6, 7 months. And so the theory with baby-led weaning is you're giving them little chunks of food as opposed to mushing up the purees for a variety of reasons. But most parents, when they do that, are super scared their kids are going to choke. So that's why they don't want to do it. And they're very fearful of eating at every meal. And it's like, what's the point of giving yourself a major stress multiple times per day if that is the case? If you're totally gung-ho on doing it and your kid does fine, then go for it. It's I haven't seen a lot of evidence that kids are going to choke a lot or have big issues with it. So I think it's fine to do it if you want to. And there's certainly some positives to it. But I mean, I didn't do it, right? We did purees first, and then we started with some mushy food and then kind of worked our way up over the first few months. But again, it's like, can you not just do both? Like what's the huge advantage to doing that one? I don't see it.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that first of all, doctors, especially pediatricians, are not bad people, right? I never speak bad of pediatricians. These are a bunch of individuals that went into medicine to help kids. So it's not bad people. It's just medicine is a certain training and things go very slowly within medicine, and we're taught very specific things and for better or worse, very research driven. And most of the data comes from pharmaceutical companies, and that just is what it is. And you want things to be research and data driven, but at the same time, that isn't always the reality of the real world.
Right.
And so sometimes we need that nuanced discussion about some of these topics that just doesn't seem to be happening. And then you have this shame that parents have, and they just don't even want to talk to their doctors about certain things because they know what the recommendations are. And the two bigger ones that I would think of would be screen times and sleep, especially co-sleeping, because the number one most disregarded recommendation from pediatricians is co-sleeping. Absolutely, there is no question. One of the most researched things is sudden infant death syndrome. So we do know for sure, I think at this point, or very close to for sure, that on your back in a flat surface with nothing in the area is the safest way to sleep, the most minimal risk for sudden infant death syndrome. That we have lots of research on. But the reality is that a lot of people co-sleep. Some studies show over 70%, if not higher, do it at some times. So the recommendation to never co-sleep isn't very helpful for the parents that are going to. And so this is where I feel like a nuanced conversation can be really helpful for parents, because it is very reasonable to say, well, the lowest risk for sudden death syndrome is this, but if you are going to co-sleep, we don't recommend it for sudden infant death syndrome, but here are the ways to minimize your risk. And the things that we know that are most risky for sudden infant death syndrome, if you are co-sleeping, are on a soft surface, so like a couch. And then the other big risk factor would be if the parent's under the influence of anything. So alcohol, drugs, medications that are sedative medications. And so you absolutely should be aware of those things. So if you are co-sleeping, well, don't do it if you've just been drinking. Don't do it if you've just been smoking. Don't do it,
Mm.
on a couch if you have the option, because that's going to increase your risk. Then if you are doing it, at least you're minimizing your risk as much as possible. Because if you just don't tell your doctor, then you're going to do things that are increasing your risk. But the risk overall is very small anyways. So let's just minimize that risk as much as we can.
Right. Is it kind of like when you say the overall risk is very small, is that kind of like the risk of like being, struck by lightning? It's like, well, if you don't want to go like golfing out in the alone or like flying a kite in a storm on a golf course, but like if you're golfing in the woods, it's not going to be as high. Like, how common is SIDS?
I don't know the exact statistics, but it's definitely much
Yeah.
more common than getting hit by lightning. I've seen different
Shoot.
statistics. Yeah. So it happens. Like I've seen some like 1 in 1,000, things
Okay.
like that. I've seen different numbers posted on all sorts of different studies. So I don't think it's super clear, but it's definitely not like getting hit by lightning, like 1 in a million. It happens. I mean, we definitely see it in the hospital.
Yeah.
These
It
things.
actually, the 1 in 1,000 does look pretty accurate. Just doing like a quick whatever Google search is good at, it looks like it might be between like 1 in 10,000, 1 in 1,000, depending on, like you said, who you listen to.
Yeah. So it's not, I mean, that's not a huge risk, but it's a real risk. I mean, 1,000 kids, one dies, or let's say 10,000 kids, one dies. That's a real risk. You're not getting it, out of 10,000
Mhm.
people getting hit by lightning. I don't know what those numbers are, but it's probably in the millions.
Way less. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I like to ask somewhat ignorant questions for people like, who, like you said, like they might not know what epidemiology is, but do you know why, if the parents are on substances or drugs, like why that would increase the risk of SIDS?
Well, I would assume it's because they are not paying as close attention to where their child is, or where they're sleeping, or what position they're putting them in, or they fall asleep themselves holding the baby, or they roll onto them, or they are in a deeper sleep, so they don't wake up if they move onto a baby, or the baby's crying, or other things like that. So I think it's just the you're not as alert.
Right. And to keep a baby on their back, do you have to prop them up like on things on the side?
No, you don't need to. I mean, the theoretical sleep best position is just on a like in a bassinet or a crib, and just on a flat surface. So you don't need to do anything.
Got it.
In
See,
in
these are
that
all, yeah.
Yeah, no, and in a lot of Norwegian countries, they just give them a box, like a
Yeah.
box, sleep on the box with a little mattress.
Got it. Use like a little shoe box or something, or boot
Yeah,
box.
I don't know. They get like sleep box. I think it's either Sweden or somewhere, where in the hospital they give them a birth box, and it's like got a bunch of stuff in there for them, but then they use the box to sleep in for the first couple of weeks.
Got
Like
it.
simple. You don't
Hmm.
need a lot of stuff.
It's like bringing a puppy home in a crate or something.
Mhm. Right. And that's one of those things where, again, I talk about in the book, it's like we're sometimes we're about the wrong things. We're super worried about the nursery and having everything ready, but you don't really need a lot of stuff. Your baby's probably not even going to be in the nursery for the first few months anyways. Most people have their baby in their room for at least 6 months to a year. So you don't have to have everything ready to go on day one. And sometimes it makes you feel more prepared. That's fine. But being wealthy, having a lot of stuff, a lot of trinkets, is not what a baby really needs. They just need you. They need some food. They need a place to sleep, and that can be a cardboard box.
Got it. Right. They're not going to be like, you never know. Maybe when they're like 25 and starting to go through therapy, they'll be like, oh, I had this vivid memory of being put in this lame box.
That's where it all started, Mom.
I was traumatized. How bad of a parent. I think that's a lot of parents' fear too. They're worried that their kids are going to come back and say, you did a terrible job, right? Whatever it is.
They
Yeah.
are, but I think that is a lot of our fear, but yet our fear is not around that our kids are going to have a chronic disease, which they will unless we do something different. And that's where we need to start shifting our focus. I think if 50% of kids or so have a chronic disease, well, to me as a pediatrician and a dad, we need to shift what we're doing to try to prevent that.
For sure. And that's why it's the start of your book, right? It's like health
Right.
first.
Exactly. I mean, I start right at the beginning with it's called like the Dr. Gator smoothie and the seeds of health. So it's kind of a play on, when you watch all those like daytime TV shows and all the quote unquote gurus, I'm air quoting here if you can't see me on a podcast, but they have their like smoothie. Oh, you throw in some carrots and some celery and this and that, and that's going to cure all disease and all problems that you have, which is not the reality of anything. The reality is that to be healthy, it's all the small things that you do in your life. I call it, big scoop of the seeds: stress, environment and toxins, exercise, diet and sleep, and sunlight, nature, community, love, family. All of these things are the Dr. Gator smoothie, air quotes, because it's the things that go into what creates a healthy child and what creates a healthy future. But we're not doing that, and we're not focused on that, and most people are not, and the outcomes are pretty scary at this point.
Yeah, for sure. Um, and I've heard once in a neurology class I was taking that kids don't really start to make their own choices until about 2 years old. I don't know if that's about right. Or maybe they don't have awareness, as much awareness until two.
They don't have as much awareness. They're still developing, the neurons and the brain connections. I mean, I would think they make choices all the time. So I think it's just maybe like more conscious choices and
Maybe more
being
frontal
more
lobe
aware. Yeah,
decisions or
exactly.
something.
Exactly.
Yeah, less of like an emotional reaction choice or like, ooh, I want this food versus that food kind of.
Right. I think it's more the thinking part of it as opposed to there's more natural reaction to things, just kind of survival.
So are those, as far as like what you just went through, I love the seeds, the stress environment, exercise, diet, sleep, and the smoothie. But do you have um, I've heard some people say this where like the first two or the first 5 or the first 7 years are the most important. Do you have a sense of that with kids of like from a developmental standpoint, like because a lot of parents I see will sort of say like, or dads in particular, sometimes moms, they'll be like, I'm gonna work the first 5 years of the kid's life, and then like I'll be around when they're older and we can like have more fun together. But do you think it's important to like are the first 2, 5, 7, 10 years like more important than next, or what's your take on
I
that?
don't think so. So my kind of take on it is this, that we need to, at this point, focus on our health every day, always, and making all the choices, and being focused on all the choices that we're making, because they all matter. And I really think that, given the statistics, like a third of kids now have either diabetes or prediabetes, 20% are obese, 10% have mental health. Like, the numbers are extraordinarily staggering. And so if you are thinking about getting pregnant, you need to be thinking about your health, because it's going to impact your kids. If you are pregnant, you need to be thinking about your health, because it's going to be impacting your kids. If you have a baby, everything you're doing impacts their health. And it's the little things that matter, and they add up, because we do have great detoxification systems and we can handle most things, but it's very clear at this point that we're falling off the cliff, and we're exposed to too many toxins. We're not getting the nutrients that we need. And so too many people are falling over the edge into chronic disease, and we have to get ahead of that. And that's why I chose to start with the first 3 years, because I just feel like we have to get ahead of it. Not because the first 3 years are more important than the next few years, but I think it's the buildup over 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. All these things matter. And if you're going to eat a bag of chips, it doesn't mean you have to eat broccoli all the time, but at least at a minimum, you can turn over the bag of chips, look at the label, pick the bag that's better. And if you're eating that over several years, it matters. A really great study to illustrate this point was, I don't know if you're aware of this Harvard study where they looked at soup, but it's a really, really interesting study on BPA. And they took a bunch of participants and they fed them canned soup for 5 days and then homemade soup for 5 days. And it was the same people, before and after, and they were checking their levels of BPA, because in the cans of soup, the lining has BPA, that like plasticky lining in it. And the difference over 5 days was over 1,000% difference in BPA in the urine. Just 5 days, where they were checking urine before and after with the same people, and it was 1,000% difference in 5 days. So it shows me that, like, that is a staggering difference. And yes, maybe your body can handle it and it's getting it out. But what if you're eating that soup over 5 or 10 years? That number is building up. And that's just one chemical studied in one urine test over 5 days. So yeah, it matters, because if you get rid of that thing, then maybe your body doesn't need to deal with that, and it doesn't get into that level of chronic disease. But you add in PFAS and BPA and phthalates and this and that and the other, it makes a difference. It's pretty crazy what we have to deal with these days in terms of the chemicals. So at least at a minimum, we have to control what we can control. And I think we have to at this point. And if we're gonna say, oh, it costs too much or we don't have the time, well, that's fine. That's your choice. But your kids are gonna have a chronic disease. Like, you have two kids, one's gonna have one. That's the numbers. If you don't like it, that's the reality.
Totally. I think there is an element of you do have to control the controllables, but I see some of the lower income families who, kind of take a victim mentality sometimes. And like, yes, it is harder to be lower income, but it sort of goes down to what are your priorities, I guess.
Yeah,
Um,
I understand. And that it's a very good point because it's not to blame or shame anybody. It's not to talk in a way where it's like, oh, you need to spend a lot more money because you don't necessarily have to spend a lot more money on many things. There are a lot of things that are much cheaper, like cleaners. You can make them yourself. You can plant a garden with some seeds and get some food. There are ways to do it. Some things are more expensive, absolutely, but it's not about money versus not money. It's about the reality of the world. And so regardless of your financial situation, my job as a pediatrician, as someone who's trying to help parents, is to help everybody. It doesn't matter what your situation is. And whether you have a lot of money or a little bit of money, the choices that you make matter. And if you are looking at these things, well, if you're buying a bag of chips, again, it's like the healthier bag of chips isn't necessarily more expensive. It might be, but at least you can buy the two things that are the same price, buy the better one. And if you do that every single time with every single purchase, every single time you buy a cream, a suntan lotion, their clothing, the things you're putting in your house, if you're looking at the ingredients and buying the better one, it may not be more expensive, but at least you're buying the better of the two. And that will minimize your chemical exposure, and that could be enough for you.
Totally. And I think a lot of people, the average person is doing what, like hours and hours and hours, at least a few hours, if not like 4 to 7 hours, I think, a day on screen time.
Yeah,
So it's like,
I've seen 7 as average of teens now.
right. I think if we got addicted to thinking about health as a way to be a better parent, right? Like if we viewed like, how do I be a better parent? Like I need to help my kid physically and mentally have good health in a world right now where that's very difficult. I think if we viewed that as an addiction and started saying like, hey, let me research the best sunscreen, let me research this, or like look up these ingredients. If we like really cared as much about what disodium phosphate is versus monosodium glutamate, MSG, if you knew what like the differences are, then and you spend even like 10, 30 minutes researching that, you would your kid's going to have a drastically different life. So you almost have to like glorify some of the education of how to be healthy in this world versus all the other things people are focusing on.
Yeah, you have. I mean, you absolutely have to. It's a key to having a healthy family because nothing is a guarantee, but our job is to give our kids the best chance at being healthy, whether you're a pediatrician or a parent. And that comes with teaching them and trying to help them make the best choices in the long run and doing that yourself. But it starts with education. But you don't need a PhD to look at a label and see words that you actually know versus methyl tetrabroma, whatever. It's like, if you don't know
Yeah,
what the word is, you don't need to know. It's like, it's probably not good for you. So just don't buy it. And then as you get into this a little bit more, then you can start researching things. You can look into added sugar. You can look into the chemicals. You can, read things as you go. Or just like you said, okay, I'm going to buy a sunscreen today. Well, let me go to the EWG website and look up that, and they're going to say, oh, well, these are the brands and here's why. So then you start to learn, okay, I'm looking for this word. I don't like that word. I don't want BPA. I don't want this. And you don't need to have a full degree in it, but at least you start to learn some of the words to look for. And then again, it's like you're buying the better version based on what you know, and that matters, and it adds up over 5 and 10 years. But it starts with realizing and recognizing that we have a lot of ownership over our health. And I feel very concerned that medicine, health, and the media are moving our health into like this outside of us kind of mentality where it's like, oh, it's just genetics. Oh, it's just happening. Autism. Oh, it's just occurring. We're just better at diagnosing it. It's just our genetics. And like a few years ago or a couple decades ago, it was like 1 in 10,000. Then it's 1 in 50. Then it's 1 in 50. Then it's 1 in 30. In California, it's 1 in 22. And if you want to tell me that that's just because we're better at diagnosing, it's such BS. Like, there's no question that's BS. Yes, we're better at diagnosing. There's no question about that, and that's a good thing. But that's not what's going on. We are doing this, and we don't know why. Not specifically. I would presume it's the chemicals and the food that are a huge part of this. But until we say that we have some ownership over it, then it's not going to change. But I feel like we don't want to blame people. It's like this blame. Oh, well, if my kid has autism, then maybe it's my fault. No, it's not about blaming anybody. It's about acknowledging that there are things in humanity that we're doing in our environment that are either causing it or contributing to it. And then once we acknowledge that, then we can start to figure out, well, why, what is going on, and try to minimize that. And I know that's true because I've seen kids, I've taken care of them. I've seen other people that work with kids with autism that change up their lifestyle, and then they lose the diagnosis, they get better, just like autoimmune conditions. So absolutely, sometimes it's genetics and there's nothing, you could do to necessarily get rid of all the symptoms, but maybe you can make it better. But you can't tell me that it's not environmental when you can cure it, right?
Yeah,
Or
exactly. Well, yeah, I totally agree. I think that's even a controversial thing too. Like I've
very
seen
controversial.
some people say like autism, if you say like you've cured some cases of autism, people come after you because they're
Oh, all
like,
the time they do with me. They do all the time, and
oh,
it's because they say, "Oh, it's just normal. It's just it's part of the neurotypical. It's a spectrum." And I get that, but again, it's like many things, right? And so it's not normal, in my opinion, for a kid to be harming themselves. It's not normal for them to be not verbal. There's a wide spectrum of it, and some kids with the diagnosis of autism are extremely functional, like more intelligent, top of the IQ. So it's not always necessarily a bad thing per se, but if it's the symptoms are very difficult for you or your family or for your child, and are not able to, live the way that you would want them to live, or function in society the way that we want to, then hopefully there are things that we can do. And that's not to say that we don't love those kids, that we don't respect them, that we don't treat them as individuals, that they're not as important, like anybody with any sort of condition. But it is to say that maybe there are some things that we are doing that are contributing to their symptoms, and maybe there are some things we can do to make that better. And why would you not want your kid to be as functional as possible? And if you are happy with the way that things are, great, don't do anything different. But there are many, many, many parents that are having a very difficult time with this. And so for those kids, I sit here and I say, well, there are things that have been done in families, and it's not a short, quick fix because it's not a medication, it's a lifestyle change. And for those families, many times you will see over the next 5 or 10 years that they lose the diagnosis and are functioning completely, quote unquote, neurotypical,
yep,
whatever
for
you want to call
sure. Yeah, it's sort of like if you were to put a fish in a toilet and then take a poop in the toilet and the
it.
fish starts struggling to breathe, getting really sick. You're not like, oh, let me medicate the fish. You're like, well, get the environment cleaned up. Maybe like clean out the water, get a healthy fish tank. Like,
Or
you
don't
know,
poop in your fish tank.
yeah, don't poop in the fish tank. Like, what kind of people are doing this? These
That's
crazy
toddlers, I
people.
guess. But the toddler world, we can have a chapter on that, right? Don't teach your toddlers not to poop in the fish tank.
Right, exactly. But that's kind of what like everyone talks about the fish tank analogy, but I'm like, that's the next level is how crazy we just keep putting more toxins into the environment on purpose.
Hmm.
Um, and just pretending like it's not a problem. But I see the same thing. And I think it's like you don't have to be perfect if your child's in that case. But I've seen remissions, and it's usually the parents that start getting very serious about detoxification or opening drainage pathways or whatever you want to call it. And they just clean up the kid's diet, which is huge, and start cleaning up their environment and see huge changes.
Yeah, I've seen it many times on most things. And that isn't to say that there aren't genetic conditions. Of course there are. You can have cystic fibrosis or something like that. You can do whatever you want, but you still have it, right? But that's not the reality of most things. And it's just such a weird dichotomy in medicine. Like diabetes is the best example. You have type 1 and type 2. You have this autoimmune condition, and then you have this much more significant lifestyle condition. You get very similar symptoms, very similar output. You call it diabetes, but if you change up your lifestyle, for most people with type 2 diabetes, it goes away, right? And
Yep.
diabetes, it's literally called type 2 adult onset diabetes, right? It was only in adults. And I was doing a talk for Epoch Times recently on diabetes specifically in kids. And so I was trying to look up what the statistics were for kids a while ago, and you can't really find anything. Like I would put in ChatGPT, I tried to find it on PubMed, tried to find it, everywhere, and really all the research I got was, oh, was it probably existent, but there weren't very many cases. It's not really well reported. So you go back like 50 or 100 years, and this thing barely is reported, and now a third of kids have pre-diabetes or diabetes, and the average age of onset is 13 in something that didn't exist in kids, basically
Wow.
a few years ago. And it's like, well, if it could happen with diabetes, why couldn't it happen with all the other autoimmune conditions? Why couldn't it happen in the brain? Why couldn't our lifestyle make that much of a difference to create, the symptoms of what we call autism or ADHD or liver pathology or some other autoimmune condition. Like, why couldn't our lifestyle be the main factor in that when it is in
Yeah.
diabetes? Like, how is it any different? To me, it's the same thing. And I think we're just not
Mm.
thinking about that way. And I think that autism is probably many things. And I think that for some kids, it is very genetic. And for other kids, it's very lifestyle. And so that's
Right.
why some kids are harder to help than others.
For sure. Yeah, I think there's like 10% or less that are full on genetic for autism, but yeah, the genetics doesn't explain the explosion in autism, right? It wouldn't
No,
logically be able to explain that. But as
no.
far as diabetes in kids and obesity in kids, maybe just stick with diabetes, I guess. Do you think that's from sugar or fake sugar or chemicals, or what do you see as the bigger
All of
factors?
it, all of it. I mean, it's I think it's sugar is one of the biggest factors. So to me, it's a mixture of our poor diet where we're not getting enough nutrients and then too many chemicals and not real food. So you could just start with what we are eating. We're eating crappy food for the most part in the best case scenario. So even if you are somewhat mildly aware of what you're feeding your kid, you go to the grocery store, you buy, an apple, you buy some berries, you buy bananas, whatever it is from the grocery store. That's not the same food when you're picking it off a tree. It's not the same food from 50 or 100 years ago. I mean, anybody who goes to a farm, or has a garden and picks something off, how many days does it last when you pick a berry, right? 2 days, 3 days,
Mm,
maybe 5 days. You think your food was picked 3 days ago or 5 days ago in a grocery store? It was shipped across the world. It was picked, they picked it. It was sitting there for a couple of days. They shipped it across the world somehow. Then it came here, went to the grocery store, sat there for a couple of days. You bought it, took it home, and then ate it. There's only one way that that's possible. They're spraying it in chemicals. It's not real.
yep,
It's covered in stuff to keep it preserved. Whether they call it organic or not, that's like a trick, because it's like, yes, it wasn't sprayed maybe with a pesticide. Maybe it was, but not
right.
qualified pesticide. But it has to be sprayed with all sorts of crap to keep it fresh, so that way
Yep,
you can eat it and make it look good. Like apples is the best example. You look at the waxy crap on top of apples now,
yep,
and it's like, okay, that's good. It makes it nice and shiny and keeps it fresh, but we're losing something for that efficiency. Not to mention the food is mass produced, right? So it doesn't have the nutrients in it to begin with, because you're factory farming it, or it's really mass produced quickly, so that way it's just using the chemicals in the ground, which doesn't give you the nutrients that you need. And if you don't have the nutrients that you need for your body to be healthy, how is it going to be healthy? It's not. So
for
we're
sure.
starting from that point, and
Yep.
then you add in the sugar, which most kids eat more sugar in any one, bar or one meal than they should be eating all day. And it's usually not good sugar anyways. I mean, in terms of like natural sugar, dates, things like that, it's the added sugars. And then you have all the chemicals, all the preservatives, all the fast food, the dyes, it's a very long list. So you mix those two things together, and no wonder everybody's sick. Like, how would you not be sick with that when that's what you're consuming? It's
Sure.
just not set up for success.
So I guess the question is then what do we do?
So the things to do, number one, I think, are don't get overwhelmed by it, because most kids do just fine, and it's the little things that matter. So you don't have to go throw everything out in your home. You don't have to go move to the mountains, though I have friends that did. I have lots of friends that have moved and they want to live in a more natural place, and that's a great thing if you can do it, but not realistic for most parents. So you start by being mindful. You start by reading labels. You start by making small changes, and I think anybody can do that. Then once you kind of move there, then you start by cooking more. So instead of buying prepared foods, we work on cooking more meals. That way you at least know what the ingredients are. And then if you have the ability to do so, you buy things locally. So you go to farmers markets, you get to know some farmers. If you don't have that option and you can afford it, you can buy farm boxes and things like that. Even if you don't live somewhere where the farmers market, you could subscribe to different farm boxes, and they can send you something every week or every couple of weeks. So at least you're getting some of your nutrients for very fresh from a place where you actually know. And then if you can, plant a garden, so you get a few things that your kids can learn. Here's where food comes from. It doesn't come from a grocery store. It doesn't come wrapped in plastic. You can eat those things. You can learn from it, and you can touch it. And I think those are the steps that get people most of the way. So if you're mindful of what you purchase, you buy the best things possible, you go to the farmer's market as much as you can, that's going to get you most of the way. I mean, it'd be nice if we all had local food for us all at all times, but that's not the reality. But you do the best you can. But again, the best that you can in general does pretty good. And most
Yeah.
families that I know that work in that sort of mentality their kids are healthy. They do great. So you don't have to, again, live in the mountains, but you could move there.
And are you a fan of freezing stuff? Like if you say like you just got fresh berries from the farmer, could you like buy 10x and then freeze it and then use it for smoothies in the winter time kind of thing?
Yeah, you can definitely do that. But I would choose something that's fresh and frozen over something that's mass produced any day. I think that's fine. You probably still lose a little bit if it's frozen over time, and it's not
Yeah.
perfect. I think that's better. First of all, there's no need to buy popsicles or ice cream or things like that. You can just make it yourself with berries, and it just tastes just as good, if not much better.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great thing to do. But I think personally, realistically, humans have developed to eat fresh local food. That's what our genetics are used to for a long, long time. And so ideally you're eating the things that are around you that are grown locally, but that's not always the case. So sure, like you have to do whatever you can that's reasonable, that's going to get you the farthest along in terms of the nutrient density. And if you buy a really good food from a farm and then freeze it, that's going to be better than the thing that has no nutrients in it to begin with.
Got it. What about, I mean, like big picture perspective, you said a bit ago too, is that we should just be happy. It's like this weird dichotomy of like we want to be really happy that we just have food and we're not starving in like a third world country, but at the same time we have to realize that the food is somewhat toxic and is like potentially harming us, and there are organic fruit pesticides. So it's like you want to be grateful, but also realize we're in kind of this messed up health situation, so we have to do the best we can to help our children.
Right. It's having a realistic like a perspective that we understand that there is nuance. Because if I was to say this, sometimes in some places people would be like, oh, you're just ableist. It's like, oh, you mentioned like, okay, socioeconomic status and people that don't can't afford it. Like, I get that, I understand it, but my job is not to speak about what is the thing that is the cheapest. It's to talk about what is going to give you the best chance to be healthy. You do whatever you can within your budget, within your means, within the reality of your situation. But if we're not identifying what is healthy versus what is not healthy, and what is better versus what is worse, then we're never going to move forward. We're going to move in the wrong direction, which is what is happening. Health is declining. Our life expectancy is going down. Chronic disease rates are going up in every single category. Basically, cancer is going up like crazy in teenagers and kids and young adults. It's an absolute nightmare of health. And so, yes, we need to make sure that everyone has enough calories to survive. That is true. But that is the baseline that we do have at this point. If that's not the case, if we're living in a famine, okay, it's very different, right? We're not talking about,
Right.
oh, you need to get the fanciest. You're like, you need to eat so you survive. You need to get your whatever. But that's not where we live right now for the most part. That's not who's listening to this podcast. That's not who I'm talking to.
Right.
Talking
And
to real life parents. And it's like, this is what we want to do to be healthy. And so do whatever within your means.
yeah, that perspective is priceless, honestly. And there's so many things you can do as well to be healthy for free. Like you can get outside more, you can move your body more, you can multitask moving your body while outside, you can kind of get more sleep, you can cook faster meals too. Like home cooking meals doesn't have to take forever, include a lot of meal prep. So there
Yeah.
are a lot of ways to like hack the system. You can buy in bulk from Costco when it's organic and freeze it, or you can get a farm share. You can split a quarter cow and I got a chest freezer off Facebook Marketplace for $45. So there's a lot of things you can do if you get creative, but a lot of people get stuck in the like, oh, I can't do that because I can't afford
Right.
Erewhon grocery food prices.
Can we talk about exercise? Because I think that's like a really, really good point. That's
Yes.
a huge, the other big issue of the day. And to me, it's that term is the issue in general. It's like exercise. Oh, I got to go for a run. Oh, I got to do this. But you look at the blue zones, right? You look at the places where people are the healthiest, and it's not exercise, it's their life, right? And this is one of the biggest changes I feel like has happened over the last 50 to 100 years is used to be that men went to work and women stayed home, and women did a lot of cooking at home, and that's obviously not the case anymore, and that's totally fine and reasonable and good in many scenarios. But what has happened from that is we have moved from the men go out and work on the line. They're working all day with their hands. They're farming, whatever it is, and the woman is at home cooking all day. And you look at the grandmas in the blue zone, and it's like cooking is like a full-time job. If you're doing it in that kind of way, it's like they're more built than I am. They got the hugest muscles in the world because they're like rolling and working and making things for the whole family. And so it's not about exercise to be, I mean, yes, if you're not exercising, to like put it into your daily life, but it's how can we change our lifestyles back to something that just is healthy, right? Our life is healthy because of the things that we're doing, the jobs that we're taking, the way that we move around the earth these days. We're not walking, we're not moving, we're not cooking, we're not farming, we're not doing any of this stuff where it's like we're forced to kind of exercise because that's just the normal. You didn't see obese people in pictures almost at all, 50, 100 years ago, because you were just moving all day. That's what you were doing. And so it's not about what life, what roles of parents is right or wrong or better or worse. It's just that we have to think back to like, what were we built to do? And we're built to move. And our lifestyle has moved more towards we need to make money. We need to focus on efficiency and speed and making money. And that's fine. Like, this is the reality of the world, but you have to know what you're losing.
For
If that's
sure.
and if that is your life, if you work at a desk job, then how can you make sure that every day you're going to get the exercise that you need? Are you going to cook for a few hours at home? Is that possible? Can you walk? Do you take stairs every day? If you're in a big building, can you walk up and down the stairs instead of
Oh
taking the
yeah.
up? Like there are ways that you can build it in as opposed to like, oh, I got to go to the gym today, which you can do. That's great, but
Yep.
that work for most people long term.
Yep. It's like park your car at the end of the lot. My
Mhm.
dad used to do that so his car wouldn't get dinged by someone else. It was his concern. But I saw a fact on I think it was Casey Means or Callie Means. They were talking about how 200 years ago, 70% of the United States was in agriculture and farming, and now it's about
Right.
1 to 2%. So the jobs have changed a lot too. So I think like, yes, there are more chemicals, but we're also just moving way less. Like they say, sitting's the new smoking, right? It's
I
kind
think
of
so.
like, yeah.
Well, I think food is the new smoking. I think food and our lifestyle is smoking. And that's why it's so wild to me when we talk about obesity and then you get attacked for shaming.
Mhm.
Same thing. And it's like, are you attacked for discussing that smoking can cause cancer? Like that's your job as a healthcare practitioner. I'm not saying you have less value or that you're not a good person, but there are very serious, obvious, clear, is very heavily studied scientific reasons why being obese and overweight is not good for your health and your long-term health, and therefore we need to make changes. But yet, for whatever reason in society, things like that, autism, are now attacked if you discuss the health perspective as a physician. It's like,
For
what is my
sure.
job? I don't understand anymore. It's like, what you say these things and then people attack you, and like, I don't care. They can attack me all they want.
Oh,
You're used to it. I'm sure I'm used to it.
yeah.
But
Well, I think it's like there's a lot of odds stacked against us, and we are in some people are definitely more endomorphs than ectomorphs. Some people are more susceptible to weight gain than others. We're probably in the skinnier group of genetics, is my guess. I don't know. But maybe you were someone who used to weigh a ton of weight. And that's the thing is like can't really assume someone's background. And I think it's like this again like a dichotomy of like we are victims of the circumstances of the times and the toxicity of the times and the jobs of the times and the screen time that's hard to avoid in most jobs these days or the sedentary lifestyle. But it's also our jobs to do the best we can as physicians. We have to educate people as best we can on what health is.
right, exactly. And that is exactly what I always try. It's never to attack a person. It's never to shame anybody. It's never to say that, if you are extraordinarily happy being 700 pounds, then so be it that you could be that. That's your choice. But you should be educated that here are the health risks that you are taking on by doing it. Here are the health risks you're taking by eating that Big Mac. Here are the health risks you're taking by doing whatever. And if you choose to do it, that's your choice, right? Jehovah's Witness, they can choose not to take blood. People have options and choices, and it's not my job as a physician to tell you what to do. If you want to have diabetes, you can have diabetes. That's your life and that's your choice. But I'm trying to teach you so your kid doesn't have diabetes if they don't want to have it. I don't want your kid at 6 years old to have stomach cancer. I don't want your kid at 6 years old to have, juvenile arthritis because of the food that they're eating or the chemicals that they're exposed to. And until people are aware that that's up to them, that it's up to society, that it's up to the things that we're doing to really think about some of these things and try to prevent it, then it's not going to change because they're going to say, well, it's just the way that it is. I guess the autism, it's just how they were born. It's just how it is. And
Right.
I don't think that's true in many, many
So
cases.
So what I see clinically too with my younger patients is that they are basically food crack addicts. Like, and then the parents learn after a few years of them eating the wrong foods or food dyes or MSG or Doritos and nachos, things that they're getting really addicted to because they're chemically engineered to make us want them more, to buy them more. But what do you do with the kids and the parents to help them start to make those changes? Because sometimes the kids, especially if they're on the spectrum, or they're overweight or whatever it might be, like they're very much ingrained in their food habits and choices. And then the parents either sometimes they don't want to, or like they don't want to have those fights. How do you coach or guide people on that process of starting to make some changes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think you'd have to switch it. You have to not switch it. You have to answer that question in two different ways, because I think it's a different answer for a typically healthy child who just prefers to eat the healthy snacks. That's what they're exposed to, versus a child who maybe has autism, who has very severe sensory
Right.
concerns. Therefore, that's something very different. So I think for the child who has a very specific palate, has sensory concerns, that's something you work with a practitioner for. I think you have to kind of slowly move away, and you still don't need to buy the crappy food. I mean, you can buy better food. You just have to work with maybe a nutritionist or occupational feeding therapist who can work within what works for that child, and then hopefully move it in a better direction. So if they like crunchy food, then you find other maybe healthier crunchy foods, and you kind of transition to that. That's harder for sure, because
Yeah.
there's some medical reasons for that, but doesn't mean it can't be done. I've seen it done many times. You just have to work within what works for them, and try to find the foods that work. On the other side of things, which is the vast majority of what really the question is about, that's called parenting. I think at the end of the day, it's called parenting, and you have to, especially for younger kids, you have to make the decision that we're not going to have that food in our house anymore. And you just have a discussion around it, and they might be unhappy for like a week or two, and then they're going to be fine with it and they'll move on. It doesn't mean that you never buy snacks. It just means you're not purchasing the really crappy snacks anymore. You have the power. You can take them with you if you want. They can make other choices, but you don't need to have that food in your home. Certainly not for a little kid. The little kids don't know anything different, so you really shouldn't buy that stuff, and they don't need to have it at all. Once they get a little older and they're going to be at parties and things like that, I'm not an all or none kind of person, so I don't think you need to make them avoid, ever having a piece of cake or ever eating at a party, but just control what's in the home, and have discussions, explain it to them, teach them about how it makes them feel, teach them about health, and say like, well, we were eating these things, and we've realized that these are not that good for you. They're not healthy. They give you stomach aches. And so we're not going to buy this anymore for our home. And I know that you like them, but we're not buying it anymore. We can have it as a special treat every now and again. But here's what we're going to have. Find foods that they like. Don't buy food. Don't just give them broccoli. It
Yeah.
needs to be something they're willing to eat. But you can absolutely transition almost any kid. I don't care if they like it or they don't like it. That's your job, to be a parent and to say, we're not going to do this anymore. I'm doing it for your health, and you'll thank me in 10 years when you don't have a chronic disease. So I think that comes with boundaries, and we don't parents oftentimes these days don't put enough boundaries on their kids. It's this shift to permissive parenting.
Mhm.
And I definitely get into this in the book again, because and this is kind of a different topic. We can maybe talk about it next if you want to, but I think that the answer to your question is very simply, that's parenting. That's your job. Buy healthy food the best that you can, and don't buy the crappy food. And too bad if they don't like it. You just explain it to them and we have a discussion around it, and this is what we're doing. And the vast majority of kids 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, are totally fine, and you give them that food again and it makes them feel bad, and they're like, oh, okay. I didn't even you don't realize how it makes you feel until you go away from it for a little bit.
For sure. Okay. So what about with your kids now? With Levi, it might not be as hard, but with your older child, does he ever like go out and eat stuff and come back or make himself sick with certain things? Or do you have like grandparents? Do you have grandparents who are like feeding him bad stuff? Do you have to kind of parent through that as well?
They're all pretty health conscious. Their family's more, my wife's family is more health conscious than I am. So, I was before. So like it's
Yeah.
not very difficult. He's still young enough that we're still at the stage where we can basically control everything, which is nice. He doesn't
Yeah.
go to a lot of birthday parties, or he's still 4, so it's not overly difficult. It's gonna get more difficult as he gets older, but even still, we've been to parties, we just prepare it, where we prepare him like, okay, there's gonna be cake there, you can have a couple bites. You can have one piece. Sometimes we'll bring things that are to switch, like, for Halloween, we had some healthy candies and healthy treats that we had pre-prepared. He switched it for those, and he was super happy because he doesn't get it in general anyway, so he doesn't care.
Great. Yeah, that makes
Know
sense.
any different, right? I think once you're like 10 years old or something, it's harder because then they see it in their friends, and that can be a little more difficult. But so far for us, it hasn't been a thing. But you teach them. I mean, he's 4, but he understands. He knows what's good and bad. He knows what's healthy and not healthy.
Yeah.
I don't know that he's super introspective yet in terms of I ate this and I feel this, but you
Yeah.
know, you start at their age and you work with it.
That makes sense. Yeah, I was interested in your take. We had another doctor at my office. As her kids got older, some of them would be more led into like, oh, I want to have all the bad food. Then they would have it. They'd have like a Domino's pizza. They'd get really sick and they'd be like, okay, I actually don't want that again. So then they learn through trial and error, kind of like what their body was telling them and what to eat or stay away of.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I think that's important. I think that's what you do. You teach them, and then you're not. I don't think you should stop them from ever eating a Domino's pizza. I don't think you should stop them from ever eating a treat. That is where the learning comes in. It's like alcohol too. You know, some people never give their kids alcohol, but a lot of families in all the rest of the world do. And then their kids like, oh, that's gross, and then they don't care about it. Yeah, they go back to it later. It's not this like taboo thing. So I feel like if you make it too taboo, then you could run the risk of going in the wrong direction. But you teach them what it is, what it does, and then if they eat it and they feel bad, then they understand.
got it. Okay. Um, how much more time do you have, Joel? I got one or two more topics I'd
I
love to
got time. I
cover.
got at least half hour more, whatever. So whatever you need.
Great. Me too. I got, yeah, about half 24 minutes. So um, I want to cover placental encapsulations and screen time,
Sure.
but you want to give your take on which one you want to talk about first?
We can do placental encapsulation first.
Yeah, let's go through that. I know in your book you were saying, there's not much evidence for it. I'd like you to kind of elaborate on more of that.
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting modern phenomenon because medicine and birth especially is very medicalized these days. And so I think that a lot of more naturally minded families are looking for ways to make it a little bit more holistic or natural. And so something that has come out as being a possibility is placental encapsulation, which is basically freeze drying your placenta and then eating it usually in pill form over the next few weeks or months or whatever it is. And a few celebrities did it, you know, maybe 5-10 years ago. And so it's become more popular and something that is offered. And I certainly get asked a lot about it at prenatal interviews, but there is no evidence that it really works. Any research that has been done on placental encapsulation doesn't really show a great benefit. Certainly people say that it does. So people want to do it. I don't tell people not to. I haven't seen anything that says that it's harmful, but it just doesn't have the evidence that it makes a big difference. Some people swear that it helps them with their mood, postpartum depression. So I don't think it's a bad thing, but it's probably not the best bang for your buck. Maybe it's more placebo effect than anything. The reason that it was done in the first place is because some animals eat their placenta after their young baby is born. But the thing that is interesting to me that I mentioned realistically is that they eat it raw. They eat it right there. It's not freeze dried and put into little pills and then eaten later. So really, if we were going to do a study, it should be on eating our placenta raw right after, which I don't know, maybe that could have benefits. I don't know. I'm not sure if
Right.
anyone's volunteering for that study, but that is what is done in nature. So not freeze drying and eating it. So if people ask me if they should do it, I say that's up to you, right? I don't think there's enough evidence to say that you should do it. I just don't see the evidence that it's very, very helpful. So go for it if you want to, if you have the money, if you feel like it's useful for you. If you've done it before and it helped, great, but the evidence isn't there.
Yep. I know you talk for people who are more interested, definitely check out your book. But I think it's fascinating too. Just because it's like natural doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy.
Right. And,
Right?
and I've talked about that in many different things because this is where it's very unfortunate that medicine and holistic medicine don't work together. It's like there's some people that make very out there claims, and then it gives the alternative medicine all of this woo woo kind of like it's way out there. But just because something's natural doesn't mean it's good for you. Like you could eat a mushroom and die, right? So natural isn't
Yeah.
necessarily better, but medicine's also not necessarily better. It's just that there are so many alternatives and supplements and herbs that have been used for many generations and thousands of years, hundreds of years, and a lot of them even do have some good research on it that can be helpful. But for whatever reason, medicine thinks that most of the stuff is woo woo, and it blows my mind because for a baby, let's say doctors like, oh, everyone should take vitamin D. We need vitamin D. And then all the other vitamins is like, that's woo woo. Like, why are you even talking about it? Why are we testing these things? This is crazy. And it's like, what? Like you're testing for iron, you're testing for vitamin D. We should put everybody on these, but then all the rest of it is nutso. It's like, it's the same thing. It's just a different vitamin.
Yeah.
So there's this weird world of pharmaceuticals that's kind of penetrated medicine completely.
Yeah.
And they have the money, so they do the research. And that's not, I don't get mad at pharmaceutical companies. I mean, I'm sure there's some people in there that are not the best people, but for the most part, their job is to make a product, do research on it, prove that it works, and make money. Their job is to make money. That's literally what the CEO's job is to do. If he doesn't do it, they're going to get fired. You cannot get mad at a pharmaceutical company realistically for trying to make money. It's our job to monitor them, and it's our job to keep them in check because their job is to make products and make money. They're not here to be honest. It'd be nice if they were, but their job is to make money at the end of the day. And so they're doing the research, they're doing the studies. Nobody's doing research on vitamin D or vitamin C or elderberry or zinc because there isn't a lot of money to be made in those. But it doesn't mean that can't be helpful. It's just that we don't have the same level of data
Mhm.
because not where the money is. So we just have to be mindful of that. It doesn't mean those things can't be helpful, but it would be so nice if we could all work together. It's like
For
we're
sure.
all on the same team, right? Like I'm on the same team as you as a practitioner. I'm on the same team as the parents. We're all trying to keep kids healthy, and it's not a competition.
No, it's kind of like the firefighters can work with the construction workers. It's like if your house is burning down and you're dying, or if you have a major condition, you might need some medication or a firefighter to come in and save your life. But their axes and fire hydrants are not what you're going to use to like rebuild your health or your house back to normal.
Right. Medicine needs humility. It's this mentality of modern medicine versus alternative medicine, except modern medicine is the new thing, not alternative medicine. And modern medicine was built around infectious disease. It was built
Mhm.
around people dying because they would get sick and then there was nothing to do and then they would all die. Like that's how it was hundreds of years ago, right? You get pneumonia and you die and your life expectancy
Yep,
was 40. And that's not the case anymore. We've come a long way in medicine and that is good. There is
that's
a lot of
great.
good with medicine, right? Like I'm not against pharmaceuticals. So you get a pneumonia, you can go back to your latte 2 days later, right? As opposed to dying in the hospital, which you might have done 10, not like 20, 30, 50 years ago. You can get hurt and go to the hospital, get a cast, get an MRI, get an X-ray. These things are all great, but medicine doesn't have the humility to say, you know what, things have changed. And chronic disease is one of the biggest issues these days. Treatment is important. We need to keep doing that, but we also have to focus on prevention. But we cannot do that in the system that we have. One, because doctors are not trained in this stuff. And two, they don't have enough time. So that isn't to say that all doctors need to get retrained in everything or that doctors should be the ones spending an hour and a half with each patient on their diets because they don't have the time when there aren't enough doctors. But we should understand what doctors are really good at and then work in teams. Work with a nutritionist, work with a chiropractor, work with a naturopathic doctor, work with a occupational therapist, and let our patients work with those different people so they can spend an hour on these things. And we have that model already. It's called dentistry, right? What do you do when you go to the dentist? You don't see your dentist, right? You see the hygienist who spends 45 minutes with you. And then you see your dentist who waltzes in for 3 minutes and goes, oh yeah, I looked at the x-ray, boop, 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 boop. Your teeth are good. Good luck with you. And like that is a very reasonable way that medicine could go, that you
Yes.
spend time with the other practitioner for an hour on your health, and then you go in there and the doctor who's really good at making sure you don't have cancer, making sure that it's not an ear infection. Perfect. The doctor can pop in, do those things, and then all the rest of your time can be spent on your actual health.
Yep. We definitely are in a major primary care physician shortage. So I think that
Mhm.
makes sense. We almost need like nurses or physician assistants or somebody to be like better educated so they can come in and have a hour long or half hour long discussion on like your concerns and maybe nutrition, lifestyle type stuff.
It could
And
happen. It just needs to be paid for, right? It
yeah,
needs to be a system where that's reasonable to be done. So it has to be identified by medicine as important. It has to be paid for, if they're in America, by insurance companies to a reasonable amount that it could be affordable for businesses to stay open. Because you can't stay open as a doctor and get paid $50 to see a patient for 2 hours. Like that doesn't work. But if the insurance company said, okay, well, we'll pay you $50 for them to see a nutritionist for half an hour and another 25 to see that they're this person, like, and you made it enough money that it made sense, then why wouldn't we do that? But that takes humility and it takes a big change. It's not obviously not an easy change, but
No,
it is possible to do. It is possible, and it's not going to be doctors doing it. And I don't
right.
think they should. I don't think they should. I don't think that doctors should be the nutritionist consultants. Like there are people that learn that their whole life. So why should we should be more aware of it? We should understand that it contributes. But I don't think that it's the doctor's job to spend 2 hours with every patient. There's not enough doctors.
Totally. So then has that led you to go more into private practice or like a cash pay model, or how do you practice?
Yeah, so I'm a private practice. I have a hybrid model. So we kind of spend more time than the average, but not, like 2, 3 hours, like some all cash pay models, just because it's with pediatrics, it's very hard to go with that model for a variety of reasons. So it's
Well,
just not.
getting a kid to sit in a room for 3 hours. Whew.
Well, that for sure isn't possible, but you could do it with parents. But there are, certain things we shall not ever be allowed to mention that cost a lot of money in pediatrics. So you kind
Yeah,
of need insurance for those things. So it makes it
got it,
very,
got it.
most parents don't want to pay for those things out of pocket if they want to do them.
I see. Got it. Okay. And then what about screen times? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so screen time is another interesting one because the AAP says that you no screen time before 2, which I think is completely unreasonable at this point. I think it's fine if you want to. I think that's not a necessarily bad recommendation. It just makes people feel bad because no kids these days are basically in front of no screens. You're on your phone, you're in front of the TV, you need to do something for a second. So to me, when I think about screen times, I think about what are they not getting. And so if you're putting them in front of TV for a long time, then I think they're not getting outside, they're not moving, they're not playing, they're not learning. So that can be an issue. But I don't think screens in and of themselves are inherently bad or dangerous, especially when used very minimally and you're getting educational content. I try to look at things like, oh, if you're on a plane ride and your kid's having a tantrum, what's better, the tantrum for them or them watching a screen for a couple hours? If you need to go to the bathroom or you need to cook, what's better? Should they be on a screen or having a tantrum in front of you? So I think it's not inherently terrible, especially if you're using it very minimally. I don't think people should feel shame for using it. I just think we need to understand that when you're in front of a screen, you're not outside playing, you're not actively learning. Learning on TVs does happen, but not in any way as good as learning actively, like reading. Like you can learn some stuff from hearing somebody read, but it's not the same thing as being actively read to, going back and forth. So as long as you know that and you're using it minimally, I don't feel like you need to feel very shamed if you're using it a little bit. And certainly if they, watch some TV in the background at grandparents' house for a couple minutes, should I be worried that it's mushing my kid's brain? No, come on. That's not realistic. Just minimize it and just keep it to as much active time as you can, and then every now and again you put them in front of a screen. I think that's okay.
Yeah. Um, hmm, okay. I don't really have any questions. Like that's like very, I love listening to you because just like very logical. It's very straightforward. It's very practical. It just makes sense. I think people can relate to that.
Which is what I try. I mean, that's again going back to the book. I guess if we're circling back, it's the goal of the book is to de-stress parents, right? It's people are more stressed than ever. And I try to joke at the beginning about like, oh, there used to be mercury in things, and we used to not have
Yeah.
car seats, and stuff used to be coated in lead, and kids put it in their mouth, and
Yeah.
cocaine used to be used, and heroin as like regular, sleeping aids. It's like these are things that were not that long ago, and that was part of parenting. So like, is your life as a parent much more difficult or much more complicated or stressful? Not really. I mean, it's less scary for most things, right? And you have the internet, so you can look things up, and you can know when to be worried, and you can access your doctor, and you can call them, and you can go to the emergency room. So we have a lot more safeguards and boundaries than we ever had before. A lot of our stress is self-imposed by social media and by Googling and by going down a path that we don't need to. And so I try to go through the biggest questions that parents will ask and that I get all the time, and give both sides and make it a little fun, but make it more evidence-based and also personal opinion based on these things. Because most of it doesn't have great evidence, or it doesn't have very definitive evidence. It's like, well, here's what the evidence shows. So this is what it kind of like we talked about with SIDS. It's like, well, here's what the evidence shows. So you should know these things, but here's what people are doing. So work within that world. And same thing with the AAP guidelines for screen time. It's like, well, here's the guideline, but what are people really doing? So
Right.
we talked about those things, and then you make your own decision what works for your family. And that's how most things should be. The vast majority of your questions, the doctor shouldn't tell you. I think the most vast majority of the questions are, well, it doesn't really matter. Here are your options. Pick which one makes you least stressed.
Yeah. I love that. De-stressing parents is crucial right now. And yeah, now more than ever. And people were even like using mercury thermometers and like taking the mercury out and playing with it. Kids would probably like lick it here and there. And
Mhm.
everyone, yeah, everyone's worried about like mercury and fish, but like big picture perspective is like we have food, we're not having these extreme toxins. I actually had lead poisoning from a 1800s house that I lived in with like the water,
Mhm.
and it was also peeling off the walls and like getting in the floor. And I was just, you learn, you live and you learn. Can't change the past, but you can do a little better.
Maybe we can finish up with like a little social media story. So I feel like social media, especially like things like Instagram, very stressful for parents because they're comparing themselves to other people all the times. And one of the things I want to remind people of is that it's not real. Most of it is not real. And I can give you the example of being the pediatrician to some very famous people, models, celebrities, whatever it is. And let's say they come in on their 1 month visit, and everybody with a 1 month old is not at their best, right? You're in your sweatpants, you got spit up stains all over you, you're maybe at your least happy, you haven't slept in a month, and maybe you're a little bit in tears, you're not very happy. Like, I've seen that before many times. And then I've also seen on their social media that same very day after they left the office, a picture of the whole family smiling, perfect picture with their like photographer with them, maybe in their nursery. Hashtag blessed. Being a mom is the best. Being a dad's the best. Parenting is the best. I couldn't do it. And it's like, I just saw you an hour ago and you were in tears, and it's like, it is fine. Like, but my point is, not everything is real, right? And parenting is real. Having issues with it is real. Being unhappy at times is real. And so if you're comparing yourself to this false reality of what people are showing, then it's going to make you much more miserable and stressed because you feel like you're not doing it right, or you must be
Sure.
doing something wrong. And that isn't the reality. So, use social media, use Google, whatever it is, but just keep in mind that what you're seeing isn't always exactly real. So don't let
No.
that stress you out too much, because we used to compare to our own village, our own grandparents, our family, everybody around you. We don't have that anymore. We have social media.
Yeah.
So that's not the same thing as having, grandma right beside you half the time.
It's true. And the other like tricky thing about social media too is that every couple years there's a new miracle cure that comes out.
Mhm.
Right now, I think it's Acemanin. Before it was like TRS and zeolites, and some of those things are useful, but like you have to be careful. Different companies will hide the bad reviews and only show like the great testimonials, only show how amazing this product is, only show how amazing placental encapsulations might be. But then like 10-20% of people I know who try it have like terrible reactions to it, or they get horrible acne or like whatever it is. So like a lot of the negatives get hidden, just like you were saying, like the negatives of being a parent, the stress of the parent gets hidden. I think as a content creator, I also don't want to bring people down by telling them like, here's my sucky part of my day today. I'm
Mhm.
not gonna like, I'm trying to motivate or inspire
Right.
people, lift them up a little bit, but it's a fine balance. Sometimes I will say like, I'm struggling. I'm not going to be on here right now. Like I'm dealing with some stuff, or like, here's what I'm going through. But you also have to keep like your private life private too. Like I don't want to share everything going on in my
Right.
personal life. But yeah, it's very helpful, I think, for people to know that like social media is sort of like your highlight reel, and it is sometimes fake and curated.
It is. And even not just that, but almost all of media at this point. I've been very shocked, actually. I'm doing like more PR than I've ever done before for this book, and starting to kind of reach out and try to get on different shows and things like that. And I really have been shocked to realize that there are a good chunk of shows that you have to pay to be on. Like some of them
Yes.
a lot. And I'm like,
Yep.
I reached out to one show. I don't like to name names or whatever, so we'll just leave it as what it is. But like, it was over $10,000 to be on their show. And it's like, that's not a show anymore. That's an advertisement. And so, you think you're watching something that's real, but it's like, this is just a paid advertisement that the person's saying, this is great. And that they get around it, I guess, however they do. But I'm like,
Totally.
it's really crazy to me that like some of these shows make you pay all this money to be on it. And I'm like, I'm the one giving my time. So
Right. I know. I
I
get
have
it.
to fly to you. You want me to
Right.
pay to be
And
on?
I know some guy in Vegas like sent us a DM. He's like, "Hey, I love you to come on my show." And then we're like, "Okay, maybe you seem a little weird. Like, I don't know about this." And then he sent them email and it was like, "Oh, it's $20,000 to come on my show." I was like, Okay, well, we're like not on quite the same tape. Like, I'd rather just interview people that I think are trustworthy and they're going to help bring people as much truth and value as possible, or
Yeah.
like helpful education, not necessarily do it for, the money to get on the show as a income stream. But I guess
Right.
some people do use it as an income stream, and like more props to them, but you do have to be careful about that.
Yeah, I think it's pretty wild. I know exactly what you're talking about because I did judge that too. So yeah, I know who that is. But either way, it's like when you're asking for $20,000, that's not a show anymore. Like if you were like, oh well, we're just trying to cover our costs and we're small and it's $100 or $500, okay, like that's not exactly the same thing. But when you're talking about that, then it's not even real. They're just probably paying for their viewers, and it's I don't know. I think it's wild. I didn't realize that. I realize some things, but like it's very surprising. So, anyways, I think the moral of the story here is not everything is as it seems. So, trust yourself, speak with your family, speak with your friends, have your own village. You can do this. You got this. Parents have been parenting forever. We have more technology than we ever had before. In many ways, if you live in Western society, it's safer than ever. So even if you're stressed, everybody's stressed. I'm stressed. We started by talking about this before, where it's like people think, oh, I'm a pediatrician. It should be easy to be a parent. Like, okay, yeah, I know some of the medical stuff. So from that standpoint, maybe it's a little easier, but it's not to do with parenting. Parenting is not being a doctor. Everybody's nervous, but you do it, you figure it out as you go. And a book can be helpful in so much as to kind of give you some guideposts of what might be coming, but you're just gonna have to figure it out as you go, and you ask questions as you go.
Yep. One of my patients who's a therapist, she said parenting is a little bit like, getting with a girl the first time or like making out the first time. She's like, you can't really read books on it. Like you can read books that are like helping you with how to have a relationship or like giving you tips or giving you the perspective that your book's good. But at the end of the day, you just got to do it, and everyone's going to be a little nervous. And like the more kids you have or the longer you're a parent, it'll settle in. And I think I don't know. I'm hoping that the love you feel for your child makes it all easy in some ways.
It makes it much easier, and that it comes with humility. It really does. Like someone who wrote a book, you'll see right in there if you're reading it. It's like I tell people, like, I'm not going to be able to tell you what to do, right? Like that, first of all, you can't give medical advice unless you're a patient, but even if you could, you can't. Like everybody's different. And so the only thing that I can do is kind of alert people to some of the things that are going to come up. And then their situation is going to be unique to them, and you will figure it out as you go. Everybody forever has, right? We figure it out. We figure it out as we go. So it's good to be nervous. That's okay. Like a good parent is going to be a little bit nervous about it, but you will figure it out. You will be able to do it, and we all have. And you just figure it out as you go. And you read a book now, and the world's gonna be different in 5 years anyways. It's like it's not even relevant. You probably read the old textbooks, and they probably would be laughable at this point. Some of it.
For sure. For sure. Well, thank you so much for your time, Doc. I love talking to you, learning from you, watching some of your stories and your Q&As, and really appreciate everything you're doing to help parents and your patients out here.
Thank you so much. And thanks for everything that you're doing. You're one of the voices of reason and really helping a lot of families. So I always appreciate everything you do too.